Hillman sets a screen, rolls to the basket. Gray.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Today's story isn't just about a contract. It's about loyalty, legacy, sacrifice, and a quiet power shift happening right in front of the entire basketball world. And if you only saw the headline, you missed the real story completely. Because on the surface it looked simple. Kelsey Mitchell re-signs with the Indiana Fever. 1 year, $1.4 million, clean, professional. Almost routine in a league that's finally starting to reward its stars the way they've always deserved. But nothing about this moment is routine anymore. Not the money, not the timing, and definitely not the decision itself. Because when a player at the absolute peak of her value hits free agency, coming off one of the best seasons of her career, the expectation is clear. You chase the biggest offer, the longest deal, the most security. You maximize everything you've earned through years of work. But Mitchell didn't do that. She didn't follow the script. She didn't treat this like a transaction. She treated it like something much deeper, something personal, something built over years that most fans never saw. And that's where this story changes completely, because this wasn't just about staying in Indiana. This was about choosing a vision, choosing people, choosing a bond that goes beyond numbers. And when she spoke after signing, she didn't talk about money. She didn't celebrate the milestone. She didn't post like most athletes do when they secure a major deal. Instead, she talked about relationships, about conversations behind the scenes, about Caitlin Clark, about Aaliyah Boston, about Lexi, about Sophie, about a group that doesn't just see themselves as teammates, but as something closer to family. And the way she described it made it clear this wasn't a business decision. It was a commitment to something they're building together, something they believe in, something they're willing to sacrifice for. And that word, sacrifice, doesn't show up in contracts. It shows up in culture, in trust, in shared struggle, and that's exactly what defines Mitchell's journey. Because to understand why this decision carries so much weight, you have to go back to where it all started, before the headlines, before the spotlight, before the Fever became one of the most talked about teams in sports. Back to 2018, when she was drafted second overall out of Ohio State, already one of the most dominant scorers in college basketball history, a player who had proven everything she needed to prove at that level, stepping into the WNBA with expectations of becoming the face of a franchise. And what did she get in return? Not fame, not fortune, but a rookie contract that paid less than what many people make in standard office jobs, around $58,000 per year, for a player expected to carry a rebuilding team. And she did exactly that. She showed up every single night. She produced. She scored, she led, even when the team struggled, even when the wins didn't come, even when the arenas weren't full and the spotlight wasn't there. And through all of it, she never complained, never demanded a way out, never turned her back on the franchise that drafted her. And that kind of loyalty isn't common in professional sports, especially not in an environment where players are constantly evaluating their worth and their opportunities. But Mitchell stayed. She endured losing seasons. She endured years without playoff appearances. She endured being overlooked, underpaid, and underappreciated, and still she stayed, because for her this was never just about the present. It was about building something that would eventually matter, and that belief was tested in ways most players never experience. Especially in 2024 when, in the middle of what should have been the most rewarding stretch of her career, she lost her father, the man who shaped her game, who coached her, who guided her, who invested everything into her development, gone suddenly, without warning. And yet even in that moment, even carrying that kind of personal loss, she didn't step away. She didn't break publicly. She continued to show up, to perform, to lead, to deliver, hitting shots with the same confidence, playing with the same intensity, even though everything behind the scenes had changed. And that resilience added another layer to her story, another reason why her connection to this team runs deeper than most people understand. Because while the world was just starting to pay attention to Indiana again, especially with the arrival of Caitlin Clark, who brought a wave of energy, attention,
Clock to one, Lloyd. Oh yeah! To Lloyd.
and transformation to the league, Mitchell wasn't new to the struggle. She had lived through every difficult season that came before it. She had been the foundation when the team had nothing else to rely on, and when things finally started to turn. When Aaliyah Boston developed into a dominant presence, when Clark arrived and changed the entire dynamic, when the Fever became relevant again, Mitchell was still there, still consistent, still committed, still leading, and that continuity matters. It creates trust, it creates chemistry, it creates something that can't be manufactured overnight, and that's why when she talks about family, it doesn't sound like a cliché. It sounds real, it sounds earned. It sounds like something built over years of shared experience, shared losses, shared growth, and now shared ambition. Because this team isn't thinking small anymore. They're not just trying to compete, they're trying to win, and Mitchell sees herself as part of that mission. Not just as a player, but as a leader who helped make it possible, and that's why she didn't leave. That's why she didn't chase a bigger deal elsewhere. Because for her, the value of what's being built in Indiana right now is greater than anything another team could offer. And that decision sends a message, not just to fans, but to the entire league, that something serious is happening here, something that goes beyond individual success, something rooted in connection, trust, and belief. And when a veteran player at her level chooses that over everything else, it changes how you look at the team, how you look at the future, and how you understand the power of loyalty in a league that's evolving faster than ever, because this isn't just about one contract. It's about a shift in mindset, a shift in culture, and a reminder that sometimes the strongest decisions aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones made quietly, with purpose, with clarity, and with a vision that goes far beyond the moment.
Where is it? Lethal is Kayla McBride.
What's happening right now isn't just a continuation of a story, it's the deeper layer that explains everything, because while most people are focused on contracts, numbers, and headlines, the real transformation is happening behind the scenes, in the choices, in the mindset, and in the vision that players like Kelsey Mitchell are quietly building. And if you look closely, you start to realize that her journey has never been limited to basketball alone, because even while competing at the highest level, even while carrying the weight of a franchise for years, Mitchell has been preparing for something bigger, something beyond the court, pursuing a PhD in educational leadership, setting her sights on graduating by 2028, while also running the Kels Hoop Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting young student-athletes who don't have access to the same opportunities. And that detail matters more than it seems, because it tells you exactly who she is, someone who understands that the game doesn't always give back what you put into it, someone who has lived through years where basketball didn't financially reward her the way it should have, and instead of waiting for change, she built something for herself and for others. And that mindset becomes even more powerful when you place it next to what just happened in the WNBA, because when the new collective bargaining agreement was finalized in 2026, it didn't just increase salaries. It fundamentally reshaped the league's entire economic structure. It turned what used to be limitations into possibilities, with the salary cap jumping dramatically, with supermax contracts reaching levels that were once unimaginable, with minimum salaries finally reflecting the reality of being a professional athlete. And for players like Mitchell, this wasn't just a raise. It was a long overdue correction, a recognition of years of excellence that had gone underpaid. Because when you look at her career earnings before this moment, it tells a completely different story. Nearly a decade of elite production, leadership, consistency, all adding up to a total that didn't even begin to match her impact, and yet she never used that as leverage to leave. Never turned it into a public demand. She stayed, she endured, she built, and now, when the system finally caught up to the value of players like her, she had every reason to maximize it fully, every reason to secure long-term stability, every reason to explore offers from other franchises that were ready to invest in her. But instead, she chose something else, something far more strategic and far more meaningful, because the $1-year $1.
She can't believe it!
For million deal she signed isn't just historic on paper as the first Supermax contract under the new agreement. It's also a signal, a calculated move that fits into a much larger blueprint unfolding in Indiana. And when you break down that blueprint, you start to see just how precise everything is, because this isn't just about one player getting paid, it's about balancing an entire championship window within a new financial reality, with Aaliyah Boston already locked into a massive long-term extension, with Caitlin Clark approaching her own inevitable Supermax deal, with the organization trying to build something sustainable without collapsing under the weight of its own success, and that's where the real challenge lies. Because in a league where salaries are rising rapidly, where stars are demanding their value, where teams are trying to compete while planning for the future, every decision becomes critical, every contract becomes part of a larger equation, and in that equation, Mitchell's choice stands out not because it was the biggest, but because it was the most intentional, because she could have taken a different path, she could have secured multiple years, she could have removed uncertainty, but instead she chose flexibility. She chose alignment. She chose to keep the window open for what this team can become, and that kind of decision doesn't happen in isolation. It comes from conversations, from trust, from shared vision, and a lot of that was built away from the spotlight during the off-season, in environments where players could actually connect, talk about their futures, talk about what they want to build together, not as individuals, but as a collective. And when you hear Mitchell talk about those conversations, about knowing they wanted to stay together, about making it make sense, it becomes clear that this wasn't a last-minute decision. It was something that had been forming over time, something rooted in belief, and that belief is exactly what separates this situation from typical free agency. Because in most cases, free agency is about leverage, about maximizing value, about making the best possible deal for yourself. But here, it feels different. It feels like commitment. Like trust, like a shared understanding that what they're building together is worth more than what any single contract could offer. And that's where the story expands beyond Mitchell herself and into the identity of the Indiana Fever as a whole. Because what's happening inside this team right now is rare, not just talent coming together, not just smart management decisions, but something more organic, something more powerful, a culture that is forming naturally, built on mutual respect, on shared growth, on players who genuinely support each other, and you can see it in the smallest moments, in reactions, in words, in how they talk about each other publicly, because when Aaliyah Boston secured her record-breaking extension, the response from Caitlin Clark wasn't calculated.
Of X Factor's Ariel Atkins off balance.
It wasn't filtered. It was genuine excitement, real joy, celebrating her teammate not just as a player but as a friend, and that kind of reaction tells you everything about the environment inside that locker room, because in professional sports, especially when money and recognition are involved, it's easy for ego to take over. It's easy for competition within the team to create tension, especially when you have a young superstar like Clark entering a team where a veteran like Mitchell has already established herself over years of hard work. That dynamic has broken teams before. It's created divisions. It's led to conflicts. But in Indiana, it's unfolded differently because Clark hasn't positioned herself above the team. She's embraced being part of it. She's shared the spotlight. She's lifted her teammates, and Mitchell, instead of seeing her arrival as a threat, has embraced it as an opportunity, as the missing piece that could finally transform years of struggle into something meaningful. And that mutual understanding has created a partnership that goes beyond statistics, because when they play together, it's not just about points or assists, it's about how they elevate each other. How Clark's vision creates opportunities that Mitchell converts with elite precision. How Mitchell's scoring forces defenses to stretch, opening space for Clark to operate. How their games intertwine in ways that don't always show up on a stat sheet but are impossible to ignore when you watch them. And that synergy is exactly what makes this team dangerous, not just now, but in the future. Because when talent aligns with trust, when skill aligns with sacrifice, when individual goals align with a shared vision, that's when something special begins to form. And that's exactly what we're witnessing here. Not just a team improving, but a foundation being built, one decision at a time, one commitment at a time, and Mitchell's contract, as historic as it is, might end up being remembered not for the number attached to it, but for what it represented, a moment where loyalty, strategy, and belief came together to shape the future of an entire franchise.
The last 2 games of this regular season is Citron takes and makes from deep.
Now this is where the story reaches its most powerful point, because what we're witnessing is no longer just about talent or contracts. It's about something far more rare in professional sports: trust, timing, and instinct, the kind that can't be taught overnight. The kind that only develops after hundreds of hours of playing together, competing together, understanding each other's rhythm, and genuinely wanting to see one another succeed. And when you add Aaliyah Boston into this equation, everything becomes even clearer, because she isn't just another star on the roster. She's the quiet foundation, the player who made a conscious financial sacrifice in the very first year of her extension so the team could retain key pieces like Kelsey Mitchell. And that decision alone tells you everything about what's being built here, because money can buy talent, it can secure contracts, it can attract attention, but it cannot manufacture belief, it cannot create selflessness, and it definitely cannot force players to prioritize the collective over their own individual gain. Yet that is exactly what is happening inside Indiana, where 3 cornerstone players have independently made decisions that reflect the same philosophy: that winning together matters more than maximizing alone. And when you include Lexi Hull in that picture, a player who has steadily improved, who has committed herself to growth, to defense, to becoming a more complete contributor, and who also chose to stay rather than explore the market, you begin to see that this isn't random. It isn't coincidence. It's culture, real culture, the kind that organizations spend years trying to build and often never achieve. And it extends far beyond the players themselves, because even at the leadership level, the alignment is undeniable, with head coach Stephanie White returning not just because of opportunity, but because of the connection she built with Mitchell. A relationship rooted in trust and understanding, and with the front office bringing back experienced architects who understand what it takes to build something sustainable. And even investing in the future through infrastructure like a state-of-the-art training facility designed around player development and well-being, every single decision points in the same direction. This is not a team chasing short-term success. This is an organization constructing something meant to last, and at the center of it all stands Kelsey Mitchell. Not just as a scorer, not just as a veteran, but as the emotional bridge between what the Fever used to be and what they are becoming. The one who endured the losing seasons, the one who stayed when leaving would have been easier.
KT even put it in.
The one who represents the idea that loyalty and ambition don't have to exist in conflict, that you can stay committed and still aim for greatness, and that's why her presence carries so much weight, because she embodies the journey, the transition, the proof that patience can eventually turn into opportunity. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the question becomes even more interesting, because now it's no longer just about Indiana, it's about the entire league. It's about whether what the Fever are doing can actually be replicated, whether this model of alignment, sacrifice, and shared vision can become a blueprint for other franchises, or whether it's a unique moment created by a perfect combination of timing, personalities, and circumstances that simply can't be copied, because traditionally, professional sports have followed a very different pattern. Teams draft and develop talent, only to lose their best players to bigger markets and bigger paychecks. Especially in cities that aren't considered glamorous destinations, and for years, Indiana fit that description perfectly, a place players passed through rather than committed to. But what's changed now isn't just the market perception. It's the structure of the league itself, with the new financial landscape giving teams the ability to pay their stars at levels that were previously impossible, creating an environment where staying is no longer a financial disadvantage. But even with that shift, money alone doesn't explain what's happening here, because the same numbers are available across the league. The same contracts can be offered elsewhere, and yet players like Mitchell chose to stay, not because they had to, but because they believed in something that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. the relationships, the shared experiences, the understanding built through both success and struggle, the conversations that happened away from cameras and headlines, where teammates made a collective decision to prioritize each other, and that's the part that no salary cap, no facility, no front office strategy can duplicate, because it's human, it's emotional, it's built over time, and it's fragile. Which is exactly why it matters so much in this moment, especially as the WNBA enters a new era of growth, with massive media deals, expanding franchises, rising valuations, and increasing attention, creating more opportunities than ever before, but also more pressure, more complexity, more decisions that force players to balance personal gain with collective ambition, and in that environment, the default approach has always been to maximize individual earnings, to secure the best possible deal while the window is open. Because careers are short and opportunities aren't guaranteed, but Mitchell's decision introduces a different way of thinking, one where players actively collaborate to structure their futures in a way that keeps their core intact, where sacrifices are made not out of necessity, but out of belief, where the idea of winning together becomes just as important as financial success, and if that approach actually leads to results, if the Fever translate this alignment into real contention, into deep playoff runs, into a championship push, then it sends a message that could reshape the entire league, proving that success doesn't always come from chasing the biggest contract, but sometimes from investing in the right environment, the right people, the right culture, and that's where things become even more complex, because as powerful as this foundation is, it will eventually face its biggest test, the reality of a system that can only sustain so much at once, where salary caps, contract extensions, and roster limits force difficult decisions, where maintaining a core becomes increasingly challenging as players' values continue to rise. And that's the inevitable moment every great team encounters, when the ideal collides with reality, when loyalty meets limitation, when choices have to be made that affect not just careers, but relationships, and the question then becomes not what this team is capable of building, but how long they can keep it together before those pressures force change. Before someone has to adapt, before someone has to step aside, before the balance that makes this situation so unique is tested in ways that can't be avoided, and that's what makes this story so compelling, because right now, everything is aligned, everything is working, everything feels possible, but the future will demand answers, and when that moment comes, it won't just define the Indiana Fever, it will define whether this entire approach, this belief-driven model of building a team, is truly sustainable, or whether it's simply a rare moment in time, a perfect alignment that can only exist before the realities of professional sports inevitably reshape it.